Oh, welcome back to another episode of Love, Life, and Legacy, the podcast dedicated to helping you navigate these hypersexualized times. And I just took a sip of water, and it seems to be a bubble in my throat. I sound like a frog right now. So, in today's episode, everybody, full disclosure, I was asked by somebody, I was requested by somebody very seriously to, I don't know, seriously, but they really called me out and said, "Hey, I don't know your high noon story. What's up with that?" kind of thing. And it's a very fair question. I don't give my testimony that often, and not because I am ashamed of it, or it just isn't that relatable. I call it the Gonzo effect. You will learn all about that in this episode. It's throughout the Gonzo effect. But I wanted to let you know that I tried to unpack the kind of pre-church, pre-high noon, and then post-high noon phases of my life. And I don't go into too much detail about pre-church because it's not that important, but I do want you to understand kind of my roots and where I come from, because I am so devoted and dedicated to this role, serving you, and I have been for years, and I've never really been like that before for anything I did, like have this kind of passion. It is 10:36 p.m. on a Saturday night and I'm recording a podcast. Why? Because I couldn't go to sleep, because I needed to get this out. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the kind of dedication that I have. And I just feel blessed to be doing this. And I want to help you understand why I do this. Not to extol my own virtues, but instead to just explain that I am so blessed to be even remotely affiliated with High Noon, because it's saved me and it saved my marriage. And I can see that with 100% transparency and clarity. So that's the essence of why I want to give this to you, this testimony, because as much as I've given to High Noon, I've received 10 times, a million times more. I don't know. So I just wanted to sincerely offer my testimony in respect to High Noon. And if it veers a little bit, I'm sorry. It's been a while since I really gave my testimony, so I tried to stick to the point. I hope it helps. I hope you can understand it. I hope it's relatable and it's not too Gonzo-esque, okay? So without further ado, let's hear from me. Hey everybody, welcome back. So it's me, Andrew Love, and it's Saturday night out here in Vietnam. And this is my version of a party these days. Actually, we're about to head to Korea. We're going to join the tail end of the pilgrimage. Benji and myself will be speaking at the pilgrimage. My wife is actually there already, and I'm going to be joining her with our kids. I'm here still. It's wild. Anyway, that's part of this episode that I wanted to unpack. Is the only reason I can handle all this, kind of being in a foreign country, my wife in another foreign country, and me taking my 3 kids to that other foreign country together with all of our stuff by myself as a single dad for a week, while still getting everything done and helping them homeschool and doing all this other stuff, is not because I'm a superhuman. It's because of the High Noon way. And so, okay, let me go back. Okay. Recently I was challenged to share my story, my High Noon story, which is fair enough, because I've been doing this for a while now and people know what I have to say about High Noon, and I interview other people about their High Noon story. But actually my High Noon story isn't really told. I don't know why. I just feel aren't that curious, because I'm very unique in every sense. You know, how a lot of people relate to certain historical figures. They're like, Abraham Lincoln reminds me of myself. He's very stoic and tall and looks good in a beard and a tall hat. A tall man in a tall hat, by the way, that's like my arch nemesis, just by physical matter. He's got too much matter. I'm such a short person that it's just, he would be just in the way. Anyway, for me, growing up, the person who I related to most in all of media and, out of all the TV shows that I was watching and historical figures, politics, all this was actually Gonzo from the Muppets, because he's this weirdo, this alien. If you watch these episodes, go back and watch an episode of the Muppets, and everything that he says, nobody can relate to. Whenever he says, "Oh, on my planet we do this," and people are like, "Okay, that just sounds weird." There's never any relatives. Like, nobody has any frame of reference if he's like a legit, creature from that planet, because he's just like a weirdo. Everywhere he goes, he's a weirdo. Even amongst weirdos, he's a weirdo. That's me. That's my story. And I really assume that that's the case in High Noon, that I am a first generation who joined this movement when I was 27. So I was well into my days here on this planet Earth. And I joined a church when kind of nobody else was joining. It was not a popular thing to do, and still technically isn't yet. We hope that trend will turn sooner than later. But so my story isn't really that relatable, I think, for a lot of people. Most people who are listening to this podcast are either first generation who joined in the 70s, maybe before, a little before, after, whatever, or the second generation, right? Who were born into this movement and have tried to figure this out. Well, how do I fit into all this? I didn't choose this, but how do I make the best of this, right? So I'm unique already in that. But then even in our movement, if you think about it, like High Noon's a bit of an anomaly. So again, the Gonzo effect. I'm a weirdo even amongst our own people. So that's why I haven't shared this story so much. I just assume that it's just not that relatable. And so I've broken this story down into, and this is really weird because the only way that I can record this video here on Saturday night party time is by staring at myself. So it feels like I'm watching myself on a TV, but it's me. It's like very Inception. Anyway, I'll try not to be distracted by myself. But I wanted to break this episode into pre-church and post-church, pre-High Noon, and then post-High Noon, because these are kind of three phases of my life. We're living in a very transient time. Back in the day, like my parents, it's like you got a job and you worked at that place come hell or high water for 40 years until you get your retirement package and you move on, right? And my grandparents, it's like you were lucky to have a job. They went through the Depression. So it's like if you can have a job that allows you to stick around for 40 years, you're set for life. But we're in a really transient time where things don't last very long at all. This latest tech, ChatGPT, comes out and people are like, oh my God, robots. And then 2 weeks later, like, yeah, but now there's a new robot. And like things, the cycle of news lasts about 24 seconds. You're like, oh my God, there's an earthquake over here, but there's a tornado over here. Like, it's hard to keep up with everything because everything's so rapid pace, right? So in that context, the things that I've done the longest in this ever-changing world are, first, number one, joining this movement. That happened in 2009, okay? The second longest thing I've done in my life is getting blessed to my wife. So we've recently passed oh man, I think it's 12 years. I thought it was 13, but I think it's 12. My wife and I never know. We're just like that. It's not like a big deal. We don't make a big statement to the world. We're like, hey, it's our blessing, isn't it? And it's also weird because we can't ever figure out which day we got blessed, because we got blessed in New York City, but the blessing was technically in Korea the next day. So people celebrate it on the day that it happened in Korea, but it didn't happen that day for us in New York. Think about how confusing that is. The Gonzo effect, right? I don't even know every year which day my blessing is. I have to figure it all out. It's a mystery. So that's my second longest thing that I've committed to. And then the third longest thing, other than parenting, because that's an incidental part of marriage, I guess, is High Noon. So I've been doing this for about 9 years, and I want to get into all of this. And I'm going to try not to wax poetic or get too sentimental or anything like that. I just want to kind of give you my story, and I hope that it helps, because I think you'll understand why. I come from very troubled beginnings, okay? And I'm not going to get too much into it. I'm not going to get into too many details. That doesn't really matter, okay? I'll just give you a general overview just so that you can understand where I'm coming from, because I am now the director of High Noon, and I'm a very driven person. And I wasn't always I was a very lazy person in my middle school and teen years. And when I kind of turned 18, 19, I started to become more driven. But now, especially that I have a cause to fight for in High Noon, I am extremely driven. But this to me is a blessing, and I want to unpack all of this. So let's go, if you don't mind, on a little bit of a journey. This is pre-religious Andrew, always making fun of God Andrew. I don't know for those who know, but I did comedy for a bunch of years. That was my biggest dream. I was just unpacking that with my kids. Since I was like 10 or 11, just wanted to live in LA. That's all I wanted to do, become some sort of movie star or something. I don't know. But I grew up in Canada, in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, like proper. And if you're from the city, you have to say that you're from the city, because it's some ego thing where if you're from outside, if you're from Mississauga, you ain't from Toronto. You know, if you're from Brampton, you sure as heck aren't from Toronto. And if you're from Barrie, you might as well be from Alaska, because you're not from Toronto. So I'm from the city proper, and that's where I was born and raised, but I always just wanted to move to California, period. And I wasn't the tallest. I'm still not. I heard in my high school that people could maybe grow up until they're like 18, 19. So I was really hoping that I'd grow and have some growth spurt late in life, but never happened. So I was never the tallest or the fastest or the greatest at anything. So in our world, since love is very conditional, you know, in schools especially, you have to find your niche. So my niche early on became making people kind of laugh. And in middle school, for me, that was a very new thing, because I wasn't the funny guy ever. I was just really shy my whole life. And don't worry, this is all going somewhere. My parents had a very difficult marriage, and they kind of were at their kind of worst at my middle school phase of life. And so that's where I needed the most attention. So again, couldn't get it just on my looks. It just wasn't happening. Couldn't get it on anything. I wasn't particularly gifted at anything. So I just started kind of making trouble and making jokes, right? And that was just really ugly. In 6th and 7th grade especially, it was just a horror show, because I was so nervous and I was so bad at it, but I was so desperate to feel loved that I really just wanted attention any way I could get it. The only way I could get it was kind of mouthing off to the teacher. So I became a troublemaker. And then in high school, I kind of perfected it, where I was really the troublemaker in the class. In my high school, there were meetings where all of the teachers, even teachers that didn't have me, had something negative to say about me. It was a big deal. I had perfected it. I had given many teachers heart attacks just from anger and frustration. And so that was who I was. That was my niche. And then later into high school, I realized that I don't want to be that person, because I was actually a very kind, gentle person earlier in my life. So I wanted to become more of that. And I wanted to make it so that I could make jokes, but not make trouble. So then I started to include the teachers, and then we all started winning. My grades started getting better, by the way. I failed everything all the time in high school until like the last year. And then I started to do well. Okay, so that's kind of a little origin story. And in that, you know, I grew up without any rules, without any morality, any sense of morality. And I just followed what all my friends did, and everybody dated, and everybody, if you like somebody, then you try to find a way to be in a relationship with that person. And again, my niche was, I was the comedy guy. So when I got good at that, then I started to get a lot of attention from the opposite sex. So I pursued that all throughout high school and just dated and did all that stuff. And it was quite exhilarating, and right on the other side of exhilaration was misery. Just, you know, that's what dating is, and that's what helps me with my perspective of High Noon now, is understand. I've been through that stuff, and I really want to just shout from the mountaintops how much more advanced the matching and blessing situation is from dating. The dating scene is getting worse and worse and worse because of the internet. People are becoming more and more superficial and more nitpicky. They don't even want to get to know the nuance of another person. They just want to get straight to the dessert, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. The blessing and the matching, my God, it is revolutionary. Because it takes elements from the past and it merges it with the future. So we're talking about community matching and having people participate in two people coming together, like your community, your aunts and uncles helping you to find a spouse is probably one of the most beautiful and dated tradition. Ancient, I should say, traditions. But in its old context, it doesn't work anymore because we don't live in our old communities anymore. So to have oversight is an essential part of two people merging and getting to know each other, because they need somebody outside of their relationship who is sober and who's like, guys, chill out. You're going a little bit fast. You don't know each other. This kind of stuff, like a sober viewpoint. And when you have a bunch of oversight, it's even better. And I didn't have any of that in high school. And none of my friends did. So we were all making it up. I really felt like high school, now looking back, was very much the Lord of the Flies. And nobody was giving us any information. It seemed like our parents and even our teachers were too afraid to give us guidance. So I had no proper guidance in my life. And I was a real troublemaker. And I was pushing the limits, man. So in terms of all that, I was in and out of relationships quite often because that was a standard. But like I said, always with this very miserable feeling of being worse off than I ever was at the end of a relationship. And it honestly starts to grate on you. For any of you second generation or anybody out there who hasn't really done this, and it can be very enticing, right? You watch it on TV. You watch people dating, you watch these shows, whatever, and it's so it looks intoxicating. Korean dramas are really good at capturing the cutesy in love phase of a relationship, and that's what they obsess over. I mean, TV has been doing that forever, and it can be addictive. I believe that I was actually very much addicted to being in love. I loved that feeling of being excited about somebody and somebody taking the time to be excited about me. But inevitably, we'd find out who we were to each other, and then we'd hate each other. So it was so futile. And it was like trying to pay your bills by winning the lottery. It really felt like you're just searching for love. Because even you look at celebrities, and they can have anybody they want. They can have as many partners as they want. And yet they still try to get married. They still try, right? And they usually fail. Because they don't understand what this is all about. They think it's about the feelings. And that's what you're left with. That's what I was left with all throughout middle school and high school, is just feelings. And at that age, your feelings are so volatile. And it's such a horrible time to start a relationship when you're young, when you're an adolescent, when most people do, right? In high school, it's so common for girlfriends and boyfriends, but you are an absolute maniac. At that age, you're a maniac. You have no control of your emotions. It's really a disaster, and it's really sad that that's now the norm in most places. Actually, out here where I live in Da Nang, Vietnam, don't see it much, actually. Young people not dating. They really maintain a sense of kind of childishness all throughout high school, in my observation, right? So, yeah, that was kind of leading up to moving to California and then going through my whole life. I went there because that's what the whole comedy thing was. I went out there, I got a visa, I was doing comedy, and I was really hitting the wall. But my relationships personally were causing me to be quite depressed. And when I met the movement, when I met my spiritual mom, I was at a really low point. And it was because of relationships, to be honest. And it was a perfect time for God to speak to me because I had no more answers. I was like, if nice people who have every intention to love each other end up hurting each other in the end, what's the point? Why do this whole relationship thing? It seems so futile, right? And that was my feeling right when I met the church, right when I met my spiritual mom. And that's why I can relate so much with the people who are just refusing to get married out there, or who have all these rules in marriage, like prenuptial agreements and all this, who are so mortified by the potential of their relationship ending because that's all they know. And that was my experience too. I know that very well. And it's a miserable feeling because you're always terrified that you're going to wake up and the person's going to stop loving you, because love in the secular world is man-made, and it's very fickle. It's very feeble. It's very fragile. And it can fall apart just as easily as it started, because it was just a feeling. It's largely induced by feelings. And so that's where I was coming from when I met the movement. I was really at a low point, and that's why I was so confused. So I'm going to transition now into kind of Andrew joining the movement, which is, I was so inspired by how pure, but it was so confusing, how pure everybody was treating each other. They weren't trying to date each other. When I was meeting new church members, like there was a group that I met and they weren't dating. And I was like, what's up with this? Like, there's some attractive people here, but they're not dating and they live in close proximity. And I was like, this is really, first of all, it was really awkward and weird because I was so dysfunctional that looking at functional people made me feel weird. That's a sign, right? When you see like a bunch of smokers and like, why isn't that guy smoking? What's his problem, right? Something similar to that. So it was, some deep part of me that was still pure could sense that this was right, but all of my dysfunction was going haywire, because when I started learning the divine principle and all that, it started to become clear, man, I'm messed up. I've made a lot of mistakes, especially in the realm of sexuality, pornography, all this stuff. And so this is how I quit porn. This is my story. I was being witnessed to, and things were happening inside of me that is hard to explain, other than my spirit was waking up for the first time since I was a little kid. And it was such a bizarre feeling because I could look at my hand and my hand felt like it was trembling, but it wasn't trembling. It was steady, but it was my spiritual hand. And I felt like when I was walking, I was learning to walk for the first time, but it's like an internal thing. I really felt like I was waking up, and I had all this pain that I had been a part of and caused some of it and been the victim of some of it, all because of broken relationships, broken sexuality. And so actually when I finally decided to join the movement, at that time, they asked me to sign a confession, just give my confession to somebody. So I wrote it out. And while I was writing it out, factually, there was an earthquake.
Hey, just a quick interruption to tell you about the 40-day High Noon Challenge. If you're trying to find a way to start living a high noon life today with no shadows and create a radiant blessing, then this simple challenge is for you. We will send you daily lessons from our team that will keep you motivated on your journey. It's totally free, guys, and you'll get constant content directly to you. Just sign up today at highnoon.org/challenge. That is highnoon.org/challenge. All right, back to the show.
And although it's California, they don't happen that often. It happened exactly. And I really felt responsible. Like I did this because of all my sin, because of all my, bad conditions that I had made. And when I handed it over to the guy who's going to read my confession, I had the most nervous feeling that I remember in a long, long time, because I felt like I had done so many bad things, especially in relationships, honestly, that I was irredeemable. And I really felt genuinely that I was not going to be admitted into our movement, that they were going to reject me, like stamp, no, denied, move on to the next unique religious entity. So I left to go get froyo with my spiritual mom while we waited. And when I came back, like an hour later, he had read it. I expected him to yell at me or anything. And he just said, forget about it. and I just broke down and I cried and I cried like I hadn't cried probably in over a decade. And I wept. And he was an older Japanese man and not so warm and cuddly. And he kind of patted me on the back and just let me have it out. And it was the first time that in my life I'd ever felt God. I didn't know what that was, but it was the feeling of absolute grace. Okay. And this was because of all my mistakes been piling up for years, just holding it on the inside, holding it, judging myself, being so afraid of, I don't know, just being afraid of myself in some ways, because I'd hurt people, you know. I've been very callous. I've been very reckless with my love, and I hurt people, and I've been hurt, and I just felt like a piece of trash. And so when I was accepted by him, and just kind of it was just grace. It was the essence of grace. I remember that very clearly. So that's when my journey started, together. And leading up to that, I also asked him, that same guy, maybe a month prior to that, like, I probably shouldn't be watching porn, should I? And he just shook his head. That's all it took. And I was like, and so this is where the Gonzo effect comes in, because that's all I needed back then. I've been watching porn. Luckily, I wasn't, like, smartphones were just starting to come out. This is like 2009, right? So iPhone first came out at like 2008 or something like that. So we just had laptops. And so it wasn't in my pocket all the time. You really had to, like, look for it on your computer, in your room. You had to find time and space and all this. It wasn't just everywhere all the time. So I was fortunate in that way. But I had, been using porn as a self-soothing method, because I was in a life that I just felt like I was a child wearing adult clothing, and that's what helped me. So, but when I met real people, genuine people, when I met the movement, when I met these people who were practicing a certain lifestyle, my conscience just started biting at me and just poking me and be like, bro, that what you're seeing on your computer is so the opposite of feeling of, like, what you're experiencing with these people over here. This pure feeling of, they just look at you and they're interested when you're talking and they don't want anything from you. And it's just so conflicting that I was like, I know I have to let go of one of these. And I know that it's going to be so hard culturally for me to go the way of God. And I know it's so easy and acceptable to go this, because all my friends are from this way. And I could just easily throw these weird people away, just go back to my life as normal. And that's what my body really wanted me to do. And even my mind was like, are you nuts? You don't want to hang out with these people. But my conscience, again, and my spirit was waking up, and I just had to follow it. And it was terrible. It was terrible only because the first year of following the way of God was incredibly painful internally. Again, I don't want to get into all that stuff. It's hard to unpack and hard to understand, but it's like reconditioning myself to not view women as objects, to not expect things sexually or relationally, or falling in love with, and just seeing women as sisters or aunts or mother figures was such a, to rewire my brain, and my heart was like, it took everything I had, and it was really a war inside me. But okay, I did that. And then I did missionary stuff for a few years, and no problem with porn, honestly speaking. I felt really blessed. And here's why I love this study of epigenetics, because my father had actually worked on his purity when he was a young man. And he was an incredibly pure person. He still is. I feel like way purer than myself. And his working on himself prior to marriage and during his marriage and to this day, epigenetically allowed for me and my journey to be easier. So if you don't know anything about epigenetics, I did an episode early on, a few years ago. This is 2020, I think. And it's really the study that your DNA improves if you make improvements on yourself. The more that you get rid of addiction and all this stuff, it's easier for your kids to go down that road. And I really felt my dad did that. He made so many good conditions, we would call it, allowed for me to make good conditions myself, even when I was really in a dark place. Okay, so then I joined the movement, didn't struggle with porn, amazingly, right? I realized later that a bunch of other people that I had joined with did. And I was under the assumption for the first year that I was in the church that everybody else was perfect and I was a terrible person because of my past. And I didn't know that other people were struggling with porn and this and that. And I just kind of got it. And I felt so lucky to be in this club that I didn't want to screw it up, that it wasn't even a temptation. That's kind of what was driving me. It was like, I always felt like I was barely hanging on to God's kind of shirt, and that at any point he could bolt and then he would leave me because I was dispensable. This is my early experience of God, and my spiritual mom kept on saying, God loves you unconditionally. And I just couldn't understand that. Right. So I was so motivated to not screw up that it wasn't even a temptation. Right. So in a way I was lucky, even though it was difficult to maintain that standard because it felt very conditional. So I did this for a while and then I became a pastor. Okay. And when I was a pastor, and my wife and I started our family and we started our sexual life. We had a kid out of the gate. Like, I think she got pregnant. We got blessed in March. Don't ask me which day. That was a callback. And then she was pregnant in July. Think about that. And we don't regret that. We love that. We were like so excited because we wanted to see this new kid. We were just, but we kind of, it all happened relatively quickly. And our first son was amazing. And we had an amazing time this first go around. And then we went through life. We moved a few times, ended up in Maryland. And then my wife, as you know, we did another episode all about depression. If you look in our website for podcast episodes about depression, my wife did a whole episode about her postpartum depression. And that was horrifying because I didn't know how to handle my wife's situation. And that was where sexuality started to get really confusing. Okay. So here I was, a pastor, second time around, felt like I had a really strong spiritual life, very clear standard. But in my relationship now, my wife is super depressed and doesn't want to have sex. And this is, since we've been more public about this, more and more people have been telling us about the fact that, yeah, nobody prepares you for what sex is like after a baby. Because sometimes maybe the wife needs some healing for like a month or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. And she has zero interest in sex because guess what? There's a little baby who wants her milk, right? There's a little baby who wants all of her attention. And maybe she's exhausted and maybe she's sick or maybe there's a lot of things that could happen. But nobody talks about this stuff. So here I was, we had just had our second child and then my wife becomes so depressed that I kind of lose her. And I'm a pastor, I'm taking care of a family. I'm trying to do everything as best as I can. And my wife has zero interest in sex. And so I start to blame her and judge her and accuse her. Here I am. I'm trying to be a great person. And yet I have this anger in my heart. And it's because of sex. It's because I feel rejected. Like, what about me? Yeah, I get it. You're in pain. So am I. Right? This is really the victim mindset started coming in. And that's exactly the point when High Noon entered my life. I can say with 100% certainty that High Noon saved my marriage. Working within High Noon saved my marriage. Absolutely. Because I was out of answers. I was a good person. I had a high spiritual standard. I could do anything as an individual. I could go weeks without sleep, right? I could hunduke with the best of them. I could do all this. And yet here I was wanting to just run away. That's the feeling I had, is like in my head, I had every reason to make my wife out to be wrong. She's being a bad mom. She can't take care of the kids. She can't do anything right now. She's lying like a potato in bed. Here I am working so hard. I'm raising the kids. I'm being a pastor. I'm doing all this stuff. I'm cooking. I'm cleaning. I'm doing everything. And what's she doing, right? That's where I was, is like, this is not fair. And I could get everybody to agree with me because I'm clever. I could be the victim and I could make her into the bad person. And that's precisely when High Noon came into my life and saved me from myself. Okay? So if I could kind of recap, the first stage of pre-church me was I was a wreck because I was given free reign to do whatever I want. And here I was in a doom cycle, always at the other end of a broken relationship, a romantic at heart, a dysfunctional relationship person, feeling like a piece of garbage on the side of the road, saved by the divine principle and true parents and the people who represented them. Right? Shout out to Michael, my spiritual mom. And then this phase 2 is pre-High Noon, is I'm a spiritual beast. Nobody can stop me. I'll save anybody. I'll do anything. And yet here I am in a relationship that is eroding under my feet. And the more that I try, the worse it gets, because my trying makes me compare to her trying. And now I'm trying harder than her, and I'm doing better than her. And now she's the bad person and I'm the victor. And we're both losing. And my marriage is tanking. This is when I get this amazing invitation to the Set Free Summit, right? So I'm still a pastor, get an invitation. To be honest, I wasn't that interested in porn. It's not like, at that point I was just like, I was over porn. I didn't know how much of a big deal it was. As a pastor, I was completely inept when it came to helping other people with porn. I didn't ask anybody. I just assumed that everybody was okay. Otherwise they would ask. And if they did ask, I would be like, I don't know, pray about it, right? I just didn't have any answers. I was really bad at, if people asked me for relationship problems, I would just give them kind of spiritual answers, and I wouldn't really see where they're at and try to heal them and see that spirituality encompasses emotions and intellect and will, right? That's the divine principle. So I was really not great at many things. To look back at that, I was probably not the best pastor ever. Let's just say it that way. Nor was I the greatest husband ever, but here I was trying my face off. And we get invited to this summit, and it just causes me to weep because they touched my emotions, man. I could see that here I am, I'm trying so hard, and yet my kids are so vulnerable, right? So in this 3-day summit, we go to this Set Free Summit. It's all about porn and its impact on the world and the future. And I just think about at that point, I just had 2 sons, and I'm like, man, they're so screwed. What am I going to do? This is such a giant monster. And I just wept. And then after a while, a few days later, come back. It's like, nah, it doesn't have to end this way. Maybe the fight's just getting started. Maybe I can do something about it. And that's when I signed up. Even though I was a pastor and doing all these other stuff, I signed up. Uncle Dave started being like, hey, we should put on our own event. So I volunteered, and I was part of this ragtag team of, our first call was like 20 people. I think it was pre-Zoom or something. It was like a conference call, and we were just trying to figure out how to put on an event. Disaster. If it stayed like that, it just would have been terrible. It would have been all over the place. But little by little, I started realizing that I want to help. And I got called, and they said, hey, do you want to start giving talks? And then I started getting roped in and saying, yeah, I want to give talks. So there was just nothing, kind of like no information about how to talk to our movement about porn. And here I was asked to talk about it and figure out how to give a speech. So I started to make a speech, and then I started giving the speeches. I called all the pastors that I knew around America, and I just started saying, can I come to your church and give a talk about porn? And I first started with any pastors that were at the Set Free Summit, because they knew very well what was going on, and they're like, yes, please. So I started doing that, and then I started realizing, man, all of this stuff that I'm talking about, this is undermining my work as a pastor. If we don't deal with this reality of porn and people's dysfunctions, no matter how far we're trying to create heaven, earth is eroding under our feet, right? So then at some point I realized, oh my God, I gotta follow this. I gotta do this. And I remember telling my community, I stood in front of them and said, hey guys, I'm sorry to say this, but I have to retire. And they were not happy. They're really not happy. Maybe some people actually were. Maybe some people were elated. Hey, ding dong, the witch is dead. But some people were definitely distressed by this because it's pretty sudden. But that's how it works. It's like, I got to do this. I got to run in this direction. But in terms of my personal life, what ended up happening over those next few years, I want to really accentuate this point. That in the beginning, I was talking about porn and I was trying to explain what it's doing to us. And in so doing, people started to respond and say, hey, I struggle with porn. And then I started to gain empathy for them and I started to speak to them. And then they started to show me a side of them that people weren't revealing to me as a pastor before, this side of them, because they'd be like, hey, they'd show me a certain depth. But when I started talking about high noon, people started telling me everything. I was like, what is happening? Like it was like they would tell me stuff sometimes that they'd never told anybody else and they didn't even really know me, but that was the power of high noon. I was like, my God, this is powerful. So I started getting, in the early days, it was Uncle John Williams and myself and basically Uncle Dave. We kind of a dysfunctional team, didn't know what we were doing, trying to save the world, but did not understand in any way, shape, or form what we were doing or how to go about it. But we were just laying the groundwork, and it was just this crazy phenomenon back then that I was completely out of my depth. But the more that I started to go down this road of speaking about something that seemed really hard for everybody to talk about, and for some reason, I guess because I'd healed a lot from that, I had a lot of distance from it, I could just talk, and I was just ready to talk about it. I could just shout it from the mountaintops. And people, the echo, the feedback was so strong because they would shout their story from the mountaintop. And this process started to melt my heart in this incredible way where I could start to feel more compassion for my wife, to be honest. And I realized that I had been so arrogant in my approach to spirituality and to my marriage that I all along had been trying to force my wife to be like me, and I was not being sympathetic or empathetic to her situation. And this process of kind of inculcating high noon before it was what we knew it was allowing me to see other people more. I remember being if somebody screwed up, and when I was a pastor, I would get so frustrated with them. And I'm like, why do you screw up like that? Because I lacked empathy, and it just started to really change me. And I started to be more grounded of a person that I can relate. If somebody comes up to me and says, I did something, and they tell me the worst thing that you can imagine somebody doing, my honest feeling inside my body now is not judgment. It's, I just want to understand where they're coming from, and I want to show them that I'm here and I care, and like that is the high noon way. And I feel so blessed. I know I'm talking about myself. That's the whole point of this episode, is to let you know where I'm coming from. But I swear to you that all of this, I feel like a complete guest in this entire story. I feel like God has been guiding me this entire time, and this whole high noon phenomenon, like the fact that it's a worldwide thing, the fact that it's now a culture, I don't feel responsible for it. I just feel so blessed to be remotely associated with it, to be a part of it. And again, so humbled by the fact that I know for a fact that without learning how to really unpack how I feel and how to really understand my wife and let her unpack how she feels without reacting, just hearing her out, and it doesn't mean that I do it perfectly all the time, but learning how to do this saves my marriage and allows me to experience love for my wife and my kids that I just wouldn't have, guys. I'm so humbled by that fact. Sincerely, I feel so touched by the fact that we get to do this work. And I've been such a benefactor of watching the Wolfenbergers. And I want to kind of end with this, because I don't like when people idolize humans. It's very dangerous to idolize anybody. And I want to get this clear. I do not idolize Uncle David and Mitzwe. I know them too well to idolize them. Right, Uncle Dave? So I do not idolize them. But in them, the real genuine reason why I started to go work for High Noon and have dedicated the past basically 9 years of my life to this cause is because I finally found a couple that I could emulate, and they are far from perfect, trust me. But they are always growing, and they're always learning to love each other more deeply, and they're always learning to give more grace to us, the staff, and their own kids. And like, I see them evolve, and it causes me to always want to be a better husband and a better father myself. And so this whole thing, this whole journey that I've been on with High Noon, I know maybe people expected me to get more into porn. I'm sorry that my porn story is very short and limited. And if you want to hear more about my masturbation story, there's other episodes where you can look at that there was a brief window when my wife was depressed, when she allowed me to masturbate, and I indulged for a couple times. And then I felt, again, my conscience was like, no, this is off. You are not addressing the real situation. You're trying to run away from your wife by going to fantasy wife instead of taking care of that wife right there. So, anyway, I feel like I've said all that I can in this episode. I just feel super blessed to be a part of this. I genuinely feel that the culture that we're creating, every time you inculcate High Noon in your life, that you choose to walk towards the difficult conversation. You choose, even though you get those funny feelings in your stomach because it's going to be a difficult conversation, but you have the conversation anyway. And you have the next one and the next one and the next one until those funny feelings go away and they make way for more love. If you commit to that with your spouse, if you commit to that with your kids, with anybody who's in your life that you care about, just have as many conversations until love shows up again. We will create Chanuguk without a doubt. And I don't want that to sound like hyperbole. Chanuguk is the resultant state of people who prioritize truth and honesty and beauty. And that is what we're doing here in High Noon. That's what we're trying to do. We're getting better at it. We as a staff are so committed to it. And amongst our teams and amongst our families, it's number one priority. But we're trying to create that in our programs. We're trying to make it the cultural norm that we're practicing learning what our ideals are, practicing learning how to set the parameters to get there, and asking for help from our community to get there. And that we practice the 5 High Noon virtues. And if we do that, we will be creating something that will last for eons. I don't know. We're creating God's home on this planet. So yeah, that's my story. I've told it in my head a bunch of times, so I'm sure I missed parts that I haven't thought about or whatever. But I love High Noon. I love all of you guys and gals so much. Anytime people reach out to me, I'm so happy. Anytime anybody asks for help, I'm so happy. Because I really felt like I was completely lost before meeting this movement. And then even after meeting this movement, I felt super lost because I was spiritually a rhinoceros, just stampeding wherever I went. And I just didn't have a heart enough to really do God's work, which is not always pretty. And that's High Noon's work. Is I said it in a meeting once and Uncle Dave didn't like it. So this is not approved nomenclature, but I feel like we are the janitors of our movement, and we always have our, what are those called? The suits, those suits that janitors wear. They're like a unisuit. It's not a unitard. It's like a coverall or something like that. We have our mop at the ready. We're anytime, anywhere, we'll go there if it needs cleaning. So anyway, yeah, I think I should have ended a few minutes ago, but I hope this was helpful. I hope it was somewhat relatable. I hope the Gonzo effect wasn't in full effect. I hope you could relate to some aspect of this. But I wish all of you so much that you can experience what I've experienced and more in terms of the benefits of living this way of life, of high noon. So God bless you, and I'll see you sometime later.
Hey, did you know that our team wants to do more events? Well, if you want to bring the High Noon message to your community or group, then let us know and we'll try to work something out. There's a simple application that you can fill out right now at highnoon.org/invite. And one of our team members will get back to you to see what's possible. That's highnoon.org/invite. All right, see you in the next episode.